Extravaganza. This is the worst part of the job. Yeah, trying to come up with something to say for testing.
Okay, so.
Welcome to Mercury Conferencing. Please hold for an operator.
Operator, passcode, please.
Hi there, this is the feed line for the Chilliwack presser.
Hello, it's the operator here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hey, there we are.
Yeah, this is the feed line for the Chilliwack presser.
Excellent. Okay, I'm gonna put you in there. We're gonna do some tests for your microphones. Hold on, please.
Thanks.
Okay, it's the operator.
Hi there, this is the moderator mic. We're testing the moderator mic.
Okay, moderator mic is loud and clear.
Go ahead, podium.
Podium mic test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Podium is loud and clear as well.
Okay, thank you. We're standing by. We'll start in a couple minutes.
Thank you. We're standing by.
So where are you guys from? One of you CBC and one's global?
I'm government.
Government. Ah, gotcha. And CTV. Cool. Don't know any faces anymore because it's been like 2 years since I've done any of these things, right?
Exactly.
So.
And there's a few faces now too. Right?
Well, and now it's harder to even tell faces at all, right? So yeah.
Cool. I'm Richard, by the way. Oh, Eric, sorry. I haven't been over to the mainland very much. Based in Victoria. Just confirm, you guys cut the mics completely right now, right?
Yeah, there should be nothing coming through.
Okay.
to Lindsay? Yeah. Who's moderator? Yeah.
We've got a minute out. Good. Good. George, how are you? Good. Thanks for making all this. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. It's a metal theme. A little bit of cluster at the last second, but we made it.
Oh, really? And they just like that all. And the food is like really unsavory.
Yeah. Sun's kind of been coming and going. Yeah. Got a nice glow coming in from the side.
And I know the menu will be just like, just like, get burger, and then the contents absolutely phenomenal. It's so good.
Have you ever been to Sushi Toy?
No.
It's the same thing as metal theme.
Oh, yeah.
It's owned by the bass player that plays with Danny Townsend.
Fire.
Beef, yeah.
Oh, Beef.
Brian,
Yeah.
him and Keith. I can't remember his name. This Japanese guy. Brother used to play at Grace High in high school with him.
Okay.
And so they own this Japanese sushi place.
One of those guys,
Yeah. I did ask them, I'm just bringing more just in case. Can I make this hot?
After the remarks.
Okay.
You're not that close.
Hey, guys.
Good to go? Great. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm speaking to you today from Chilliwack, BC, the traditional territory of the Stolo people. And today I want to advise those participating today that I chaired a remote meeting of the Council of the Federation, and the Premier's agreed there's urgent, pressing need to act on long-term, sustainable healthcare funding. We want to do that, as we've been saying for many, many years now, through stable, predictable increases in the Canada Health transfer. For too long, the federal government has been diminishing their contribution to public health care, and we believe that diminishment has to stop, and we need to get back to a better relationship where at least 35% of public health funding comes from Ottawa. Canadians, of course, expect us all to work together. They expect the premiers to be at the table working in the interests of our respective jurisdictions, but we need a federal partner to do that. We call on the Prime Minister today to hold a First Minister's meeting at an early opportunity, preferably before the next throne speech, but certainly before the end of the year. And on behalf of all British Columbians, earlier in the week I spoke with the Prime Minister and offered my congratulations on his re-election and his government's ability to move forward. I also spoke with Opposition Leader Erin O'Toole and NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh and congratulated them on running campaigns to make sure that all voices are represented in the House of Commons. I did ask the Prime Minister to ensure that we focus on those shared issues that we have been determined to work on collectively, whether it be ensuring that we have affordable, quality childcare, whether we continue to have funding for housing and other initiatives that will keep people safe and in something resembling what they want to be at rather than in encampments. These are issues that both he and I share, and I'm confident that we will work on those together. We need to continue to build our infrastructure to move our people and to move our goods. And that, of course, includes expanding the SkyTrain from Surrey to Langley. The Prime Minister and I do have a strong working relationship, and I'm looking forward to the next number of months and years on our shared priorities. And that includes making sure that BC's interests within the Canadian Confederation are represented internationally as well. And we did speak, and I've spoken with the Ambassador to the United States about our concern about protectionist measures in the U.S. that would have a negative impact on our tourism sector by restricting citizens' abilities to come to British Columbia to enjoy our spectacular coast and our opportunities for tourism, and I know the Prime Minister shares that as well. Lastly, I want to say that our shared and heartfelt determination to advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples is also a high priority for both orders of government, and I believe now we can make true and genuine progress on turning our backs on the history we've had and collectively go together for a future that we all want. And I think I'll take some questions if Lindsay can order that up.
Thanks, everyone. As a reminder, if you're on the phone line, please press *1 to enter the queue. You'll get one question and one follow-up. First question today is from Rob Shaw, Check News.
Oh, hi, Premier. Just wanted to ask you about police departments are sounding the alarm about the province ending funding for naloxone kids. And I know that your public safety minister has come out with a statement today saying I'm trying to find long-term funding. But I'm wondering if you are able to tell us what happened here, how this kind of occurred in the middle of an overdose crisis, and what, in your understanding, is the situation.
Thanks, Rob. My understanding is that our stockpile of naloxone is depleted, and we need to rejuvenate that. The Minister of Finance is aware of that. The Minister of Mental Health and Addictions is working on that. And of course, when it comes to ensuring that police departments across the province have access to naloxone so they can perform life-saving interventions with those in crisis, that will continue and it will be funded by the provincial government.
Rob, do you have a follow-up?
Okay, thanks. Could I just get you to expand a little bit more on being the Prime Minister and making an answer on cruise ships? What did you say to them? Did you ask them to do anything? And having talked to both of them, do you feel any more confident about Canada's ability to stop or deter this American legislation that targets our cruise ship sector?
Well, certainly the Prime Minister was aware of the issue. We have not spoken directly on it, he and I, until this week. I have been engaged with Ambassador Hillman on a number of occasions. My staff are in regular contact with her. We have engaged through Minister Mark's offices and Minister Fleming, the Minister of Transportation, with the cruise ship industry here in British Columbia, those who come to our ports. And we have a collaboration that I think has been unprecedented at this point to respond to the Alaska delegation's desire to cut British Columbia out of a cruise industry that depends on the BC coast largely for the interest of international passengers. Ambassador Hillman is seized of the issue, and the good news about our federation is that our national government is well equipped in Washington, D.C. to manage and monitor what's going on in Capitol Hill, what's going on in the executive branch with President Biden, as well as, of course, keeping us in touch with various state legislatures as issues emerge. And I have every assurance and every understanding that Ambassador Hillman and her team are working around the clock to make sure that our interests are protected. I do believe that this is a Democrat institution or Democrat government at the executive level in Congress as well as in the Senate. And Senator Murkowski, a Republican, has a bill that I would suggest is not necessarily on the agenda of the current administration, but it's one that we take very, very seriously. That's why I'm going to make sure that I'm at the table with Minister Mark and Minister Fleming when we sit down with the industry so that we can not only resist this overture to stop people from coming here, but how can we expand opportunities for tourism in British Columbia coming out of COVID?
Next question is from Justine Hunter, Globe and Mail.
$50 million BC Old Growth Nature Fund on the table. I'm wondering if you could tell me how you would want to spend that. Is that how much old growth can be saved with $50 million from Ottawa?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I was patting my suit coat to see where I left a check for $50 million. We haven't seen that yet. It was a commitment during the campaign. And if I'm not mistaken, my Minister of Environment at the time said add a zero to that and we're in the ballpark. These are significant issues. We take reform of the forest industry very seriously. We've been working diligently with all stakeholders as we bring forward an intentions paper on ensuring that we get more value out of our forests for people and communities, as well as ensuring that Indigenous peoples whose land that our forests reside upon have an opportunity as well. The old growth issues are very present, and we've been focusing on that by establishing the selection review, or the review by Member Gourlay and Merkel to start with. We're taking their recommendations, we're implementing them. We've sat down with a technical panel to ensure that we're talking about the same types of trees: large trees, ancient trees, rare trees. And all of that is coming to a conclusion in the weeks ahead, and we will certainly welcome further federal participation. I know Minister Wilkinson, at least prior to the election, made a commitment to some $50 million, but that would be a very small amount of money relative to the consequences to the forest industry, to communities, and to workers. So I'm hopeful that the federal government will recognize the importance of us working together on this, and they will up their game a little bit so that we can have a real meaningful discussion and get the conclusions that I know all British Columbians want to see. Protecting our special places, continuing to have an industry, a foundational industry, not just now, but well into the future.
Justine, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. Minister Wilkinson also talked about reaching some kind of nature agreement to protect more old growth in BC. Some of those processes you just were talking about have been moving forward at what some people would call a glacial pace. So do you see this nature agreement as a high priority for your government?
If there are partners in the private sector and foundations who want to participate in assisting us in this transformation, we're absolutely ready to sit down with them. Minister Wilkinson mused about this. We haven't got any details yet, so we're happy to hear what he has to say, as well as foundations and others who want to step up and work with us to address these challenges. And you know, Justine, probably better than most, covering these issues for many years now, that change does take time. It may feel glacial to those who are waiting for instant gratification, but we have a lot of work to do, and we've made significant progress. For example, the Fairy Creek watershed has been deferred. There is no logging going on in Fairy Creek. The Central Wall Brand also deferred as a result of consultation with the title holders, the Pacheedaht First Nation. These types of conversations are going on right now across the province so that we can have an outcome that benefits everybody, not just a few.
Next question is from Tanya Fletcher, CBC.
Premier, going back to your meeting today with the Premier and your selected priority for health spending, now that we're out of the campaign mode, how confident are you that this government, virtually the same post-election as pre-election, will commit, and are you changing tactics or specific acts to lobby for this in a different way?
Well, certainly we talked about tactics today. Many of the premiers have been at this for some time, and certainly the governments that they represent have been at this for a long, long time. There's been quite a turnover, as you know, in leadership right across the country. I'm near the senior premier at 4 years in the job, so there are new people at the table, but not new resolve. This has been ongoing, going back successive governments here in BC as well as in other jurisdictions. So we did get a commitment from the Prime Minister to sit down and have a meeting separately focused on the Canada Health transfer. The election intervened, the election has happened, everything remains more or less the same, so our expectation is the federal government, led by Prime Minister Trudeau, will convene a First Minister's meeting at an early opportunity, with the primary focus being addressing the Canada Health transfer.
Follow-up, Tanya?
Yes, thanks. Looking specifically at BC following the election and all the top issues the province has a vested interest in that require federal dollars to continue. You mentioned child care, transit, housing. What is the number one priority that you want to see movement on? And as far as timelines go, are you pressuring the elected federal government to make good on those promises ASAP?
Well, we have signed agreements on childcare, for example. I would love to see more engagement on housing issues. Former Finance Minister Freeland was very focused on that, working with our Finance Minister, Selina Robinson, to make sure that the federal government recognizes and understands that the best way to address an affordability and housing crisis is to have more supply, and that supply can be increased if the federal government gets back into the housing game in a meaningful way. So that's certainly a high priority. But for me to pick one of the dozen of issues that overlap between our two orders of government, I think would do a disservice to those that I don't mention right off the top. I'm firmly convinced that we have a lot in alignment, whether it be in Indigenous rights and reconciliation, whether it be childcare, the environment. Climate action is a high priority for the federal government. It was a high priority for all three of the major political parties, and I believe that the time is absolutely perfect for us to have a united front going to COP26 in Glasgow, speaking with one voice, national and subnational governments in Canada, that the world needs to put their attention to this, and we need to have a plan on climate action that involves everyone. There are 7 million souls on the planet. We 5 million in British Columbia can do everything we can to affect change when it comes to climate, but we need a whole bunch of partners, billions and billions of them, and the only way to get there is through international fora and ensuring that we speak with one voice when we arrive, and I'm confident we'll have that right now.
Richard Zussman, Global News.
Quebec is proposing legislation that would create bubbles around hospitals and schools and COVID testing to stop protesters. Is that something British Columbia is considering, and how quickly could British Columbia put in laws to stop protesters from barging into schools or hospitals or COVID testing areas?
I think all British Columbians are perplexed that people who have a different point of view, a minority view, would choose to disrupt children in education settings or patients in healthcare settings to get their point across. And I'm hopeful that we've seen the last of that type of behavior, but we want to ensure that that doesn't happen again, and we are working, the Attorney General and the Solicitor General, on legislation or perhaps policy changes to existing regulations to protect workers and those that are accessing those services, whether they be kids in our schools or patients in our hospitals. It is something that we don't do lightly, but we do in the interest of the vast majority of British Columbians who want to know that they can go about their business free from intolerance from a select few.
Richard, do you have a follow-up?
One of the promises from the Liberals on the campaign trail is $1 billion to the provinces to support the implementation of the vaccine card. We've heard from especially the restaurant and bar sector that they need more financial support for things like scanners and security. How quickly do you believe BC can get access to that money from Ottawa? And are you willing to move forward with some of these expenses to support these businesses before getting that money from the federal government?
Well, we have been working with businesses, non-essential businesses that are requiring vaccine certification before patrons come in for the arts, for sports, for a dinner, and we'll continue to do that. I am encouraged that the federal government started this conversation through in the middle of the pandemic, quite frankly, and now virtually every province, if not all provinces, have one form or another of the vaccine card we have here, which I would suggest 3.1 million British Columbians have already downloaded and are using or are able to use to go about their business. So this is a popular initiative. It's not one that anyone would have anticipated 3 years ago, but it's one that's essential today for businesses to offer to their patrons a space that is safe and where people have taken the same steps to protect themselves and those around them. The federal government did make a commitment. We did not talk about that when I spoke with the Prime Minister, but I know that we did make great progress as a federation through COVID by having regular meetings, talking out these issues and bringing together the diversity in our country from coast to coast to coast. And the federal government acknowledged that, recognized that, and most of the time they were right there to help along the way. And we were always grateful for those one-time interventions, but I take us back to the Canada Health Transfer. We need long-term, sustainable, predictable funding, not for ourselves as governments, but for the people that we represent. Healthcare is fundamental to who we are as a society in Canada. Publicly funded healthcare has been the difference between us and our southern neighbours, and we need a federal government that's fully engaged in that. That's a unanimous position across the country, and that's where we want to focus our attention with the federal government at this point.
Next question is from Binder Sajan, CTV.
Hi, Premier, and I think I missed it, but during the infrastructure talks, did you talk about the federal government's commitment to the Massey crossing? And I also wanted to ask you, the Liberals also campaigned on a promise to ban foreign money from entering the country in terms of the housing market. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on a measure like that.
Well, certainly we believe our speculation and vacancy tax is meeting that test. We're quite happy to work with the federal government on how we regulate foreign capital coming in for particularly to destabilize our housing market for people who want to live here rather than use our major cities as a commodity market. This is a place for people to live and grow and raise their families. We want to get back to that regularity, and I think all British Columbians do. Any role the federal government can play in that regard, we welcome, but we did not discuss it in any detail. When it comes to the Massey Crossing, we did, and all three major parties committed during the election campaign to work with us to get that crossing in place, to relieve congestion, to make sure that our economy can continue to move through the ports and the other infrastructure, transportation infrastructure that's so critical at that pinch point in the Lower Mainland. So I'm absolutely confident that the federal government in its current configuration, with the support of Opposition Leader O'Toole and third-party leader Jagmeet Singh, I can't speak for the Bloc. I did not reach out to the leader of the Bloc, and I don't expect I will.
Follow-up, Binder?
Yes. This is a question for a colleague. You may know, you probably know, that the province is rolling back some of the COVID protocols, including exposure notifications to parents. There's been quite an outcry, people saying that they weren't notified, a lot of anxiety. Does the province regret not having that notification system in place at the beginning of the school year?
Well, I wouldn't say regret. I would say that unintended consequences is where we find ourselves. We wanted to reduce anxiety for parents and families by only advising those who had had a direct contact with a potential COVID case. We've revisited that. Dr. Henry and her team have looked at that, and we have new protocols in place. Our objective from the beginning was to reduce anxiety, and we're going to continue to listen and respond. I think that's what people expect from us as well. But I wouldn't characterize it as enthusiasm or regret. It's about us, as we have been doing for 19 months now, responding to the issues as they come to us and making sure every time we make a response, it's with a view to protecting people, keeping them well, and keeping our economy going and our schools open, quite frankly, because at the end of the day, the best place for our kids to be is in a classroom.
Next question is from Lisa Cordasco, Vancouver Sun.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned earlier that you said our stockpile is depleted in relation to Nawasam. Were you referring to the Solicitor General and Ministry of Public Safety specifically, or the entire stockpile that the provincial government has? And if that's the case, what other organizations are no longer receiving NOx?
No, this was with respect to law enforcement. That's how the issue came forward. That's why Solicitor General is involved here. These ultimately are decisions government-wide. We've made a commitment to ensure that naloxone can save lives. We know that. We want it to be as widely distributed as possible. And the stockpile is specifically with a few detachments, as I understand it. But that's not to say that we need to be always vigilant and at alert and making those procurement decisions effectively and seamlessly. It's unfortunate that an alarm had to go off, but when you hear an alarm, you respond to it, and that's what we're doing.
Lisa, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. Well, that alarm went off in April of 2020. The Victoria Police Department has funded itself for the past year. That's one department. Are you concerned, disturbed, or surprised that the ministry has, not really responded to this until today when people started asking questions?
No, I'm not aware of the situation in Victoria, but I do have a very good working relationship with Chief Manick, and he's not raised it with me. Again, we can only respond to issues as they come to us, and the good news is that the rapid turnaround with Minister Farnworth and the team, working with Minister Malcolmson, is how people expect us to respond, quite frankly. When issues are brought forward, whether through the work of the media or through interventions by those who provide services, our obligation is to do an assessment and make the best decision possible to meet the needs of the public, and that's what we're doing in this case.
Marcella Bernardo, News 1130.
I was going to ask you more about vaccine passports, and especially, and feel free to weigh whichever fingers you want to on your hand about this, but how concerned are you that some businesses and people are still trying to skirt the rules or outright defy public safety orders?
Well, I am disappointed. I would be misleading if I said anything other than that. But I don't believe wagging fingers is going to solve the problem either. And I appreciate you giving me that opportunity. What we need to do is to remind those businesses that 3.1 million British Columbians is a really big part of the market. And I would expect that the best way forward for a business is to make sure that they're putting in place protocols to encourage that 3.1 million person market to come and patronize their establishment. For those who want to skirt the rules, either by disregarding the passports as a provider of non-essential services, there will be consequences for that. But in terms of enforcement, we're working with communities and health authorities and regions to find the best way to do that. We've always said we don't want a heavy hand here. We want common sense to prevail. The best way forward is to get our vaccination numbers up. They're already very, very high. I spoke with Governor Jay Inslee earlier this week as well, and he was envious of the success we've had in British Columbia. 80% to just shy of 80% fully vaccinated, 12 and above. Good news on the horizon that the federal government is reviewing, as is the government in the United States, reviewing vaccines for children. And I think that will allow us even more flexibility in protecting people, protecting communities, and protecting the economy.
Marcella, do you have a follow-up?
It's sort of regarding what happened with the notification of an outbreak happening at a school in Chilliwack yesterday. It took several hours for that outbreak to be declared by Fraser Health. How concerned are you that, parents are very concerned that they're not being told right away when there may have been an exposure of their child in a school, and what assurances can you offer them that notifications are going out as soon as they possibly can?
Well, I absolutely understand the anxiety that families would feel in this circumstance. We're in Chilliwack right now. But I do know that the notifications went out last evening when the outbreak was identified. Dr. Henry's working with Fraser Health. Minister Dix is on the file as well. And we've made amendments to notifications for that very reason. Contact tracing is underway, and we're doing our level best to make sure that anyone who's had direct contact with someone with COVID-19 is advised as quickly as possible. The broader question is also being addressed with the education stakeholders, not just here in Chilliwack, not just in Victoria, but across the province, to make sure that we've got the best possible protocols in place to reduce anxiety, to reduce the fear, and of course, most importantly, to reduce the transmission of COVID-19.
We have time for one more question. Camille Baines, Canadian Press.
Hi, Premier. Earlier today, that Premier Flood School announced bonuses of up to $18,000 for full-time nurses. Is that the kind of financial compensation you would consider for BC as well, as we also have a shortage of nurses? And what concern do you have that BC could lose nurses to Quebec or other provinces that could come up with similar incentives?
Well, we're always working to address labor market shortages, certainly critically important in healthcare at this time. We've had a shortage of nurses for many, many years now. We've opened a new nursing school in Kamloops. We're trying to train more nurses. Obviously, compensation and collective bargaining I'll leave to others. That's not my role, but I do know that we're doing everything we can to be competitive across the country, as indeed across the continent. These are challenges not just in healthcare, but every sector. We can't rely on our beautiful landscapes to keep people here. We need to pay wages that can meet the affordability challenges here in BC. So we're conscious of that when we put in place negotiating mandates, and when it comes to ensuring that we have adequate healthcare professionals. That's all about training, all about encouraging people to go into healthcare, to go into the life sciences. We're creating more spaces in our universities all the time for doctors, for nurses, for nurse practitioners. Care aides can get certification very rapidly now. There is a crisis, I'm not denying that, but we're doing everything we can to relieve that. The sad news is we're not alone. Premier Legault and I spoke about this just today on the Council of Federation call. Every province is having challenges right now, and we're going to continue to do that until we find a better way to get more people trained and bring and invite people from around the world. I'm the son of an immigrant. The foundations of Canada is successive waves of immigration to meet the challenges of our growth. We're at another one of those points right now in our history. I've raised that repeatedly with the Prime Minister, and I know he understands that as well, because he's hearing not just from me, but every premier across the country. Everybody he talks to about healthcare will tell him we have serious challenges. The best way to deal with that is to get more people.
Camille, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. So along that vein, what type of federal plans do you think there should be to train and hire and retain nurses, whether that's through immigration, more spaces? What role can the federal government take, like they have before in around the mid-90s when they created an office just to deal with workforce issues around nurses and doctors?
Yeah, that's a good reference, because that's exactly the type of thing we're talking about. We need to make sure that all hands are on deck here. We need to make sure that the Canada Health Transfer is increased so that we can compensate people. It's not just about wages, of course, it's about delivery of services. But in order to provide services for people in healthcare, you need healthcare providers. That means you have to train them, you have to pay them, and you have to make sure you don't burn them out. And most importantly, going back to one of the earlier questions, you have to make sure people don't go to their place of work and yell at them. So we need to do all of those things at the same time, and that's what we're committed to doing.
That's all the time the Premier has. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.